Okay, it is just after 1 o'clock according to the clock on my laptop here. I'm off-site. I'm not at home as I often am when I do these lives. I'm out doing a training course today, but I'm excited about today's show because I think it's a hot topic that has come up even this week, where we've been discussing the type of content that is being produced really effectively with mobile phones. So the overarching topic for today is this debate about whether mobile phones are best suited to craft highly polished professional content that basically blends in with any of the other stories that you might see on the TV, or whether it's better suited to run and gun, breaking news, frenetic, vertical type content that you might see on the likes of Snapchat or Instagram. It doesn't necessarily must be one or the other. It's a case of let's hear both sides of the argument and let's try and tease it out. Now, as always, you have the option, if you've joined us on Crowdcast, to interact during this discussion. Our speakers, both Philip Bromwell, who's already, he may be up there on your screen, but he's there on my screen, is standing by to join this chat. And later we'll be talking to Caroline Scott from journalism.co.uk. And basically they're going to be able to see your comments just as much as I can. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. By all means, go ahead and fire questions that you might have. So on the stream already, we have Sarah, obviously Philip is here, Hussam from the Thomson Foundation is online, Caroline is standing by. We have Simone, Adrian, Guto from BBC Wales. Hi, Guto. And Corinne is joining us from Australia. So that's great. So if we have 84 people registered and 12 people online, hopefully a few more will dive in as we're going through this. This will be available for catch up on the Crowdcast platform, and we're simultaneously streaming to both YouTube and Facebook on the Thomson Foundation pages. So without further ado, let's jump over to the conversation with Philip, and we'll kind of dive in the deep end. Now, if you don't know who he is, well, maybe I'll just let you intro yourself. Would that be fairer, or do you want me to big you up and see if I can get you to blush?
Well, you definitely get me to blush. I'm a former colleague of Glen's. I work at RTE, Ireland's national broadcaster. I have been mojoing for best part of 5 years now. Most of my career spent as a video journalist, both at the BBC and at RTE. I now I'm doing more Mojo than I've ever done before, and I lead a small team within RTE who are 100% Mojo, and we have a digital first sort of philosophy in that we shoot, edit on mobile and publish first for the mobile audience, and if necessary and if required and if desired, we will repurpose that content for traditional platforms such as television at the end of the line. But it's about delivering highly polished Mojo content to the audience where the audience is, which, as we all know, increasingly these days is on mobile devices.
Okay, great. So let's tease it out, because the words that you use that are very pertinent to this conversation is highly polished. And as a BBC initially trained video journalist, like you have a very well spoken of visual style, let's say. Your stories might have featured on the board here more than once today during this lesson with these students. And I know for a fact that a lot of your stories are often held up on other education programs around the world as examples of how far you can push the technical and aesthetic quality, if you like, of storytelling on mobile. So let's set out the stall. Why was that the approach that you took when you were actually pursuing mobile journalism? Like, was it because those were the skills you already had, or was it because you have a deeper belief, I guess, on how the audience responds to good visuals?
I suppose a bit of both. So I arrived at Mojo having spent the large part of my career shooting and editing on bigger cameras on desktop and editing on desktops or laptops. And for me, the evangelical moment of Mojo, which really happened very early on, was that the iPhone, which is the device that I use, has the capacity to be a really good camera and, in effect, a mini production suite in one. So for me, it was really just transferring everything I knew from my previous experience shooting and editing and bringing it to a new device and treating that device as just another camera, as just another editing platform. That was 5 years ago. In that time, the capacity of the iPhone to shoot better pictures, to absolutely do high-end editing work has really progressed. So that what was a powerful device 5 years ago is now a super powerful device today. I suppose in my case, I wasn't suddenly going to abandon all my sensibilities of knowing how to film and knowing how to compose a picture, and my sense of how you film. So I've just brought all that to my iPhone work. I think, and I was always a visual journalist. You know, for me, television or indeed online or social content is often really about pictures and people. So I like to shoot nice pictures. I'm not suddenly going to abandon my sensibilities. That said, 5 years into this, I think we're in a position where we have absolutely demonstrated that you can produce highly polished MOJO content, which sits alongside what my colleagues are doing in a more traditional way easily. And I think we can, you know, you look at the, you know, there are Hollywood directors now shooting with phones. You know, that sort of argument of the quality has long since been dismissed. So I think we're at a point in MOJO evolution where really we've shown that the devices themselves are eminently capable of producing this highly polished content. Equally, there is an insatiable demand for all the other stuff the device can do, which Caroline will speak about later. The raw stuff. You know, a newsroom is not going to go one way or the other. Ideally, a newsroom will want both. They'll want the really high-end stuff, which shows the potential of visual storytelling on multiple platforms, but equally they'll want the raw stuff, which is fast, quick turnaround. And I think the really interesting stage we're at with MOJO now is that both are very real live possibilities, and it's up to organizations, I think, to either decide they want to go one way or the other way, or ideally, in my opinion, harness both.
Okay, so I have two perspectives on it, because obviously for people who don't know who the hell I am, I also used to work in RTE and would have been involved in the early inception, if you like, of the mobile journalism project and there to an extent, but I'm not a journalist. However, I have firsthand experience that when I've been out training people, where I've had pushback from people basically saying all those old rules that you're teaching about, you know, understanding how to film sequences, understanding the importance of the wide shot, the mid shot, and the close up for getting the detail and conveying the story to the viewer, not moving the camera, which is one of the things that I really, really strongly advocate in spite of the development of gimbals and everything else. And if you're to look at Philip's work, and I hope Hossam or if Sarah are online, they might post some examples of Philip's work while we're still midstream so people can dip in and have a look. You would classically follow a similar model, Philip. You use camera moves very, very selectively, it's fair to say, right?
Yeah, but it is effectively my filming style that I would be filming with another camera. It's my filming style was established, but I don't do pans, zooms, tilts. I let the action happen within the frame. I do shoot sequence after sequence after sequence. I do shoot multiple close-ups. These are, if you look at any of my pieces, and if you were to dissect them, the same sort of themes or stylistic themes reoccur time after time. They're the tools of my trade, really. I think what we did very early on in RTE was show the potential of the device, to actually show that it can shoot. You know, if you think about what we did first in RTE, really was we went straight to shooting complete TV news packages, basically. We didn't have, if you like, we didn't have a sort of apprenticeship of getting there. We just went, okay, you know, we now have a device, it can shoot pictures, you can edit with it. Why don't we do what, you know, we're doing with other cameras and do it with this device? And then you see others who sort of go one step further, such as my colleague Eleanor Mannion, who decides to go and shoot a documentary with an iPhone. Again, these are, I suppose, the stock in trade of a broadcaster like RTE. It relies upon TV news items. It relies upon documentary longer features. So it was this kind of natural transition for us to sort of take the technology and apply it to what we were doing at that time. Now, since then, we have evolved ourselves in that we have taken note of the sort of increasing demand for content to be delivered to a digital first audience, an audience which is always on their phones. So that has allowed us to create this sort of mobile to mobile workflow that we have now, where we shoot on mobile and we deliver first to the mobile audience. That said, possibly because we have high standards, possibly because we're a national broadcaster, possibly because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, we have tried to maintain that there is a consistent quality to what we do, so that the stories that are being published digital first have a sheen, or a sort of have a level of polish, which sort of means that they can also be easily repurposed. So if they are needed, they can go to television as well, you know. So that's where we are. That's our strategy, to try to do the best job we can in the shooting so that we can repurpose and slice and dice accordingly. But because we're RTE, because we're a national broadcaster, if this is original content that we are delivering to the audience, it should really, I think, have the same values that a lot of the other, you know, it should stand by the values that that the rest of the output does. So there is going to be a good standard. But the point is, I think you can achieve that standard. The technology now is there that allows us to deliver highly polished items. It's got so good that you can shoot, edit, subtitle, do graphic design, use multiple apps to produce really highly polished items, which everyone in your organization will thank you for, and will make everyone go, wow, I can't believe that's on a phone. But as I said, that doesn't mean that we're not going to take the raw footage. That's not, you know, I think our challenge is to make more use of that raw footage, whether it be stuff that my colleagues gather, or whether it's stuff that, you know, it's UGC content. It's to try to maximize the ubiquity and the potential of mobile phones. I think we are showing that you can do really highly polished, good visual storytelling. But really, that's just one slice of the cake. But as you know, an organization like ours, it takes a long time for change to happen. It takes a long time for best practice to spread outwards. But, you know, slowly but surely.
Okay, so let me unpack that a little bit, because completely get, and I think to a certain extent, to give you full credit, I think like you've set the bar for the social storytelling driven by Mojo. If you just take the series of 6 stories that you've done about female empowerment over the last 2 weeks, like they're perfect for me. And I just showed the boxer story on the course here today. They're perfect examples of employing the same principles of kind of, let's say, rules of composition and cinematography, if you will, as you would perhaps in classic professional television storytelling, to create a mobile first format that still follows those same rules and is still very, very visually engaging to watch. And again, Hussam or Corinne posted a couple of links. If you could find the one for the boxer from Twitter and cross-post that, that'd be really, really appreciated, just so everyone can have a look at that. But can I just tease this back with you, Philip, right? What about, you talked about repurposing. What about repurposing for platforms? Or what about understanding the viewing habits of different audiences? Like, do you think that there's an age divide? Do you think people who basically are, you know, I'll pick a random number, sub 30, prefer the kind of run and gun frenetic covered in emojis, I could use swear words, I won't, that you get on Instagram stories or Snapchat, versus perhaps older audience that prefer classically filmed, much more, let's call it professional quality, or what? Like, do you see a mix in it? Do you reversion with that in mind?
I think definitely in a younger demographic, the popularity of Instagram and Snapchat and the stories format full stop basically trumps any of this kind of highly polished content that I am and my team. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to observe some of the trends, if you like. So you mentioned the boxer story. And that whole series, we decided to shoot vertically. No, we didn't shoot vertically. We published vertically. We actually shot 16:9 with repurposing in mind. But the version that went to the platforms was vertical. The interviewees are looking straight down the lens. So we've abandoned the TV sensibilities that you would do. And, you know, I suppose maybe 12 months ago, 18 months ago, you would have said, well, let's shoot the interview twice. So we have a TV version and we have a mobile version. Well, now we're just doing the one version. We just make sure it's a really nice version, basically. And, you know, people will live with that. And there have been other stories where we have looked at sort of introducing sort of, they could be stickers, or they could, you know, little flourishes, if you like, that you take from, I suppose you are being influenced by what you see on Instagram and what you see elsewhere. And obviously everything we are doing as well is subtitled as well. So it is, again, a nod to what is happening on the platforms and the way that people are consuming content nowadays. But as well as all that, what I have tried to do, and this is very definitely with a younger audience or an audience that's not watching television anymore, is to try and, in choosing the stories that we do, it's with that audience in mind. So it's trying to tap into the issues that they're interested in, that they may well be talking about on Snapchat or on Instagram, and just presenting them in a perhaps a more polished, traditional way. Because, as I said, we are trying to get this content in as many different places as possible. So, you know, if there's a chance of getting it on television as well, then we're going to take it. But we need, for it to go on television, it needs to start in a good place. It needs to have a certain standard right at the start, particularly if you're doing an end-to-end item and you're not just slotting a bit of footage into it. So we're observing what the platforms are doing. We're trying to respond to what the platforms are doing. We're trying to see if there's any tips and tricks or little flourishes that we can bring into our stories. Where I suppose we are in this again, in this sort of stage of evolution where the way we tell stories is changing, the way the audience is consuming stories is changing, and of course the technology is changing. The challenge is to ride with all those changes so that you're on top of all of them, so that you're not producing something that is actually not fit for the time, I suppose. So 5 years ago, we were doing a certain kind of content. We could still be doing that kind of content nowadays in an organization like RTE. But what we've decided to do is try and, because we have a confidence in what we're doing, we're backing it up with sort of looking at how the audience is responding to it, so that we know it works. We know the audience likes it. We get out, and we're also trying to, I suppose, satisfy our own creativity. You know, one of the reasons I do Mojo is because it challenges me all the time. I could have spent, you know, the last 5 years just doing what I was doing for the previous 5 years, which was shooting nice bits of television. What I've been excited by with Mojo is the chance to do something different, the chance to use technology differently, the chance to try to deliver to the platforms where the audience is, the chance to sort of develop a whole different strand of content, which we just weren't doing in RTE. And certainly in terms of, I've just more or less pointed my team towards carrying on with doing verticals now, which, you know, as you know, 5 years ago was chop off your hand time. But I think we will, going forwards, unless the story demands otherwise, we will deliver vertical first content. It is vertical first content that can be repurposed. It will be very polished because, to be quite honest, that's what we do best. And, you know, maybe in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, we'll switch to some other way of doing things. But right now, I think we have a confidence in what we're doing. We know we have a workflow that works. We know our colleagues like it, and we know the audience likes it, and we know that the technology makes it possible. So that's where we're at. What I would like to see is a hell of a lot more. I'm sure Caroline will talk about this. I would like to. I don't expect everyone to get to where we're at, right away. You get to where we're at by doing a lot more of the raw stuff first. So you get comfortable with the device. You get to know how to capture something and feed it and share it straight away. You get to know how to put basic subtitles on. Yeah, they're really good sort of staging posts that if you want to aspire to do the high end stuff, you have to do all that stuff. I think they're all, and there's going to be a demand for that stuff, certainly. And I can see, and Caroline, if you look at the stuff like Yusuf is doing, there's a rawness to it, but I would argue it's still highly polished. It's a polished rawness. When we talk about raw content, obviously any big breaking news story, chances are the pictures that everyone will see over news broadcasts around the world will have been shot on someone's phone by a member of the public. And every news organization in the world will want them because that's the compelling footage. That's the moment. That's the only footage that exists.
It's the editorial value, right?
Yeah. Do I think we should all be doing that as journalists? I think we can do better than that. Okay. I think we've shown we can do better than that. Should RTE pivot to a really sort of demand for really raw footage and that kind of the kind of stuff that Caroline will surely advocate for, then we'd have to respond to that. You'd have, but again, the technology allows a flexibility here. We're talking about a device that can do both. And I think that's the really great thing about MOJO at this time, is that you can fulfill the full spectrum of content needs. It's just, I suppose it's up to the organization or the newsroom or whatever it is to decide what they want. You can do you can pretty much go from this end to this end, everything in between. And as I've said, we now have Hollywood directors saying, I'm going to shoot with an iPhone. So kind of, it's all there. It's all possible.
I think I have the quote from the entire interview from you in one soundbite there. I won't circle back to it now. We have a couple of questions that have come in. So Corinne actually quite early on dropped in this one. So Philip, has the comfort level with raw video at RTE increased as a result of digital first, or do you think there's still a preference for polished content? I think to a certain extent you've kind of answered that, to be perfectly honest, but what do you think?
Well, it's been interesting because we used to the Facebook algorithm change has really played havoc with what we can expect from as what reflects a decent response, basically. Absolutely, I would say for an organization like RTE, last year we had a really good run of stories which were going into the millions, which were exceptional for RTE. Like this year, you can kind of divide it by 10 as to what's a good audience response. Now, I say to my team that you don't just judge whether a piece is successful or not by view counts or engagement. You can judge it by, is it a good piece of content? Did you do a good job with it? Is it a good story? Were we able to repurpose it in several ways? There are different ways of judging how good a piece is. In terms of the vertical, I think we haven't had an amazing audience response to the verticals because the first one we had, which was a story I did about axe throwing. And I presented that first vertically. That's up to about 1 million views. But the recent series, which have been really just first-person narratives as well, they haven't been traditional stories. So we haven't been able to bring the audience on a story journey. We've just been allowing people to present a point of view. So perhaps that's not necessarily the best way to really sort of drum up your engagement. But it's been a learning process. I think as well, the problem we have in RTE is that the core audience across the organization is something like 55, 60 plus, which is the general territory that most public service broadcasters are in. So we haven't necessarily got an audience that is an existing audience that is really crying out for vertical, or is particularly familiar with vertical. Our challenge is to almost lure people in by saying, look, these guys, as in ourselves, are doing this really good, polished, contemporary content. They're presenting it in a way that we can consume it. And the hope is that that's where we start to bring people in. So we're using, I suppose, in some ways, we're hoping the vertical will be a hook. But what I think as well on the verticals is, as soon as we start telling more stories vertically, that's when we'll be able to judge better as to the success of the project. I wouldn't describe any of this vertical stuff that we're doing at the moment as raw. It's just presented in perhaps a format which is traditionally associated with raw, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not going to directly disagree with you, but I have to be honest. If the measure of the stories that you did over the Women Empowerment series is the vertical version, they're every bit as polished as the traditional 16:9 or square stuff that you've done, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. That's what I'm saying. But I'm the vertical presentation perhaps could be classed as raw because it's more familiar with, stories basically. But the actual content within that 9:16 frame remains very polished. And that's just what we do, basically. I would like to get to a point where we could suck in some of the more raw stuff and we'd have templates that we can sort of add a sheen of polish around it to just make better use of, but that requires sucking in more content as well. So that's a challenge, basically.
Another discussion for another day, potentially. Okay, there's a few more questions I want to get to before I jump over to Caroline. So Florian, Smart Filming, is joined the stream on Facebook. Hussam has cross-posted this. Did you already make iPhone packages when it could only shoot 720p, or did the iPhone jump directly from 480 to 1080? The iPhone 4 was the product that I would have originally started testing in RTE, and that was 720p. By the time we got to the 4S, it was 1080p, and the RTE project kind of really kicked off in anger around the time of the 4S. So what was the first device that you shot with? I think it was a 5, was it?
4S, actually.
4S.
4S.
There you go, sir. Good.
But the piece that of mine, which is still astounds me, it's the King of Coffee piece, which was shot in something like 2013 or 2014 now. And I was looking at it the other day, and it was shot on a 5S, I think. Yeah. And the quality of the footage, even though I say so myself, the quality of the footage is still fantastic.
It holds up.
So we were 4 or 5 years ago, the phone was capable of doing this really highly polished content. So I just think it's great now that we have this complete sort of different genres emerging, and absolutely it should be about allowing all these forms to exist alongside each other. I mean, I'm just looking at a question that Corin asked. You've got vertical versions on Facebook and landscape versions here. Would love to hear how you approach these multi-format stories from commissioning onwards.
Careful now, because two questions later, she said, Philip has answered all my questions.
All right. Sorry. Apologies. I'm behind in the stream. But what we always do, the first question, the two questions we always ask, or I always ask, is you always start from the point of what's the story? Okay. So if you don't have a story, you're wasting your time. Okay. And then the other question is, I know you've heard me say this before, is what am I going to see? What are the pictures? Because if you don't have pictures, you can't really have a story. So after that, if I have stories and I have pictures, I don't really care whether it's 16:9 or 9:16. I'm fairly confident the content should be engaging and compelling, basically. that's where I stand on that.
Okay,
And
so
it's it's actually very easy, very, very easy. You know, we're using LumaFusion. If we shoot in Filmic Pro in 16:9, we'll edit in LumaFusion first of all in 9:16. Then when that full package is complete, we'll copy it. So we'll create a new timeline, just switch that project to 16:9, and then just slightly adjust all the shots that are in the 9:16. And actually the repurposing from 9:16 to 16:9 takes about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, if you've shot it well in the first place. You know, if you've shot sequentially, so that shift from 9:16 to 16:9 is achievable. But again, we've kind of refined our workflows. We've kind of worked at it, and we've, because we've done a lot of stories at this stage, it's allowed us to learn from each one so that we now have the workflow pretty much nailed. And, we, as a team, we know it works. And as a team, we can, even if we run into a problem, you have someone else who can dig you out. So it's, all of that has been a very positive experience.
Yeah, really good. Okay, so you've actually, perhaps inadvertently, but in a good way, you've actually answered another question. It was from Rania, which is also cross-posted on Facebook, about, can you tell us what type of apps you use? So you've mentioned Filmic, you've mentioned LumaFusion and the repurposing in Luma. You do all your titling in Luma as well, is that right?
Yeah. So we LumaFusion, I've said this before as well, has been transformative in allowing us to deliver the kind of content that we now do, in that sort of super easy ability to switch between aspect ratios is great. I can, in our newsroom, in our substantive newsroom, which is a desktop Avid newsroom, you can't cut anything beyond 16:9 or 4:3 without a hell of a lot of jiggery pokery. With LumaFusion, all aspect ratios are there. We created titles in LumaFusion which mimic the official corporate RTE titles. We're using the same fonts. We're using the same color scheme. We are using the same look. We've really drilled down, and we learn a hell of a lot about graphic design that I never knew. But again, the app has allowed us, and I've kind of I can't think of a better, to be quite honest, for a newsroom, I can't think of a better value for money product than LumaFusion, really. I mean, it's I know people quibble at the idea of paying 20 odd quid for an app, but it is delivering everything that those sort of giants of desktop publishing do at a much greater cost. And so we use LumaFusion, and we shoot in Filmic Pro, and then we play around with all sorts of other apps. I've used all sorts of other apps in the past. We've gone through phases of using Pick, Play, Post, of using Diptych. We were playing around with Video Leap the other day. What we're trying to do with all of these apps is just to find something within them, some little trick, some little thing that makes you go, wow. And then, so that's why you experiment with apps. You try to find something that other apps can't do, and then you decide, well, that's something I could bring to my storytelling. Be it a little effect, or be it a little transition. I don't know what or an animation or something like that. And that has genuinely been one of the joys of Mojo for me, in that I'm now doing things visually through a whole range of apps, which I wasn't doing 5 years ago. I wasn't doing things like playing around with fonts, or doing little animations, or thinking about collages. So again, that's been one of the real plus points of my Mojo experience, is it's by sort of tapping into this galaxy of apps and exploring what you can do with them. And the great thing is that, because of the way the audience has evolved as well. You know, these little flourishes and things that you can bring to social media now. You know, if you have a halfway decent knowledge of what your iPhone can do, you should have a pretty good social media game nowadays, because you do have this really powerful production suite there. And, you know, you can produce all these little things just by tapping a few buttons, which previously you would have had to go back to your edit suite, sit with your editor, explain to them, I want to be able to do a split screen with animations or whatever. And now you can just pretty much, you know, it's there for you.
Okay, there's two last questions. I want to bring Caroline in on this as well, but there's we have a guest called Ritika Dubey, I think it is, in India. She's asked two questions. I'm going to answer the first one if you don't mind, which is kind of a gratuitous plug, but it might help. So she said she's a mobile journalist from India, started with the process recently and is struggling with storyboarding, mobile video stories. How can I deal with it? Gratuitous plug, do the e-learning course where we basically cover, you know, sorry, we'll have to get the plug in. It is Thomson's platform. Or come to MOJO Fest in June, where maybe Philip and others will be doing workshops on how to basically tell a story visually. Storyboarding is traditionally something you might do for a filmmaking process. I think it possibly, if you literally are doing a storyboard, will slow down the production process, but it's a good exercise, and I just did this with the students, to do it photographically first, almost to document the type of shots that you might do, and then by all means then just move it into moving pictures. And then the last thing she said was, what app is feasible for graphics and animation and making mobile videos? I think you just answered that, in fairness. So LumaFusion is the preferred app that they use for all the branding and RTE. There are others, obviously. If you're on Android, have a look at Light Motion, which is also really good. Now, I do want to bring Caroline in. Philip, just give me a split second. I'll try and get her to join into the conversation. Hope this works, because we tried earlier and she couldn't hear Philip. But hopefully she'll accept the invitation shortly. I know she's definitely standing by because she's still going up as live. And
hi.
Now,
hello, Caroline.
I can't, but I have Facebook Live on my other phone, so I can kind of hear him in my ear.
Okay, that's just going to completely wreck Caroline, because you're going to get a massive delay between lip sync here and there, but 10 out of 10 for effort on that.
Yeah.
I think if you watch all of Philip's section, then obviously you know what his perspective on it is. I'm interested to throw over to you and get your perspective. Philip, can I let you go? You might
you can.
Maybe contribute via text if you're interested in.
Yeah.
In coming. Is that okay?
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Really appreciate you joining in. Appreciate it. Thanks a million. Bye-bye. Okay, Caroline. So, you've heard Philip's argument. What's your take?
Yeah, I can sympathise with his opinion, but I strongly believe that there's a necessity for both in today's news media. I completely agree with that. But I do feel like the news media industry going into 2019 without the use of that kind of raw, unedited, gritty footage will kind of be taking a step backwards. Because if you think about the way that we communicate as a society, you know, one of the dominant ways that we communicate is by selfie videos, by messaging each other what we've had to eat, by showing each other what we've had in front of us and giving us that kind of instant updates. And so if news organisations want to communicate with their audience as much as possible, from the news organisations that we've been speaking to, we found that, you know, they love being able to connect with them on that level, just like their friends would. So if we want to kind of talk to news organisations as audiences, that's a fantastic way to be able to do it. And there's lots of storytelling opportunities available as well that you don't necessarily get in this kind of polished, beautiful content, which I absolutely love to watch myself, but I'm a massive Instagram story, Snapchat junkie, so I have to admit, I am a massive fan of the kind of raw content, especially from news organisations, because I just feel like I'm much better suited to be in the story myself as opposed to watching a gorgeous package.
Okay, so like, am I being ageist by basically saying that it does basically have a line, and kind of below a particular age group, you think they prefer that immediacy, that rawness, that authenticity, for want of a better word? And Philip alluded to the idea that the mean average audience for RT is probably up around the late 50s. Mm-hmm. Is that coming down to? Polished for the old parts like me? And
no, I completely agree, because, you know, young people like to be immediate and get the news quickly and be in the situation and be able to Snapchat each other and DM each other. I don't feel that older people might necessarily appreciate it in the same way that people under the age of 35 would. And that's why news organisations are so keen to, talk to young people and find out how Generation Z are engaging with the news. But a lot of the people that we've spoken to who are, 14 to 18 years old, some of our families and stuff, they wouldn't watch a news package on the television. They wouldn't necessarily read a newspaper. They're getting all of their news from their Facebook timelines, even if it's raw, unedited content. They don't necessarily seem to mind that much. And if you look at something like the refugee crisis, for example, you had BBC Panorama. They were covering the whole thing via Snapchat, and it actually led audiences to go and watch the BBC Panorama documentary on the refugee crisis. So they use this kind of raw, in-the-moment take on it, as it were, to actually lure people to go and watch further footage. And a lot of news organisations have done that also, like Bills, who covers it on Periscope. And it's just about being there and giving them a snippet by snippet, I guess, of a news story, as opposed to something that's been highly formed and messed around with and edited.
Okay. I'm interested with Panorama, actually. So again, showing my age perhaps somewhat, but certainly my perspective, I just taught a group of kids, basically average age 14 to 16. And when I was asking the key questions, so do you ever watch television news? And it was just that kind of blank stare of like, what even is television news? Like, is it a thing? It's like, yeah, a big box in the corner. No, but anyway, Panorama, it's a hardcore news brand, and yet you're saying that they're basically leveraging the platform and optimizing the content, the style of storytelling that works on the platform. But that begs a question that I posed a while back with Snapchat. And I wasn't joking when I said this. I've never gotten Snapchat, complete definition of my age, clearly. And I've just never gotten into it. And my joke was that Snapchat should have an age filter. Like anything that mentions drink should have, are you over 18 before you can use this app? Do you think that there's a kind of a vanity? I don't think that's the right word, but there's a kind of for a lot of the content that I see that's very, very raw, it's very driven by selfies. It's very driven by this kind of on-camera desire to be, seen, which I guess something that would have been very early on in traditional broadcast. Like, certainly for me, people were don't ever be on camera.
Oh, 100%. I completely agree. And I guess it is, in some respects, there's like a vanity aspect to it. But that's because all of us now are our own television stations, we're our own channels. We don't necessarily just represent the organisation that we're working for. We all have our kind of online personas. So you will see a lot of journalists and reporters going out in the field and doing their own piece to camera, maybe for their Twitter, maybe for their own Instagram story. And it's about building that relationship with the audience as a friend. So we've seen a lot of young people, they're following reporters, they're not following the brand. They're a real big fan. For example, you take like Johnny Harris, he's the reporter for Vox, and he did a series where he travelled around the world to different borders and he took the audience with them, and all of the audience were giving him tips and advice on where to go, what to film. They were kind of setting his agenda for him. And that's because he, as a reporter, developed this one-on-one, almost personal relationship with the audience themselves. And, that's not what you get when you watch a beautifully polished piece. You don't feel the need to look up the credits and see who did it. You want to know the personality behind the reporter, and you want to know what they think about the story. So in that respect, if you look at, BBC Panorama, for example, during the refugee crisis, we actually got to know John Sweeney maybe a bit more than we would on a traditional news package. So it's not saying that this kind of raw content is there to replace traditional forms. It's just like we say, MOJO is not there to replace traditional. We can use them alongside each other to help each other out. And I do think it's one of the main things that comes down to it, which I feel personally, is in this era of like disinformation and fake news, like we need to be able to trust the media as much as we can. So giving our audiences now and again some raw footage of you out on the ground, doing things out in the field, why not? You're proving to them what goes into investigating a story even before it might have gone out on television or something like that.
This is really interesting take on it. So basically, having come from a broadcast background, I guess I can completely get this idea of there's a formality, I guess is probably the best word to describe it in, a kind of formality to the way that a lot of broadcasters might see the brand, and everyone is underneath the brand in kind of the pecking order. Whereas what you're really getting at, if I'm not wrong, is this idea that there's a level of intimacy and access that supersedes the brand, that makes a connection between the journalists if they're willing to speak in the language of the platform.
Oh, 100%. Like, we've seen reporters on, say, for example, let's say Snapchat or Instagram stories, using stickers, using hashtag, GIFs, things that you wouldn't necessarily relate to what is professional. But I think now we need to rethink what is professional, you know, just because, and I really like what Philip was saying earlier about this kind of polished raw look, because, I mean, it's true, you know, there's a difference between what is professional content and what's badly edited, what's badly shot. You know, you can film something that's out in the field. You know, I think ABC News today, they were just on their Instagram story showing some of the Californian wildfire, but it was raw, but it was beautifully shot. You see what I mean? And as reporters, I guess, yeah, content is king and all of that, but, you know, we know how to tell stories. So I do think the kind of main skills are important. You know, you can't just go out and shoot anything, but at the same time, I think there's definitely something that you get from raw footage that you don't get from a heavily polished piece.
Okay, yeah. Take. I have a few people commenting on audio because there's quite a lot of quite a lot of hiss or something on the audio signal. It could be from my. I'm not too sure. I can hear myself back, which is really frustrating.
Shall I plug my headphone in and see?
If you could, we could try it. I could possibly do the same if I can lay my hands on them. It was worth a try. No questions so far. Or maybe I can scroll down along the question queue. Let me just check here and see. Oh, that's frozen. That's okay. Oh yeah, hang on. Very interesting idea. Journalism traditionally thinks it should be detached to be professional, but if getting to know the audience helps build trust with the audience, yeah, I think that's in a nutshell exactly what Caroline has actually just said. Yeah, I think it's a very, very valid point. Equally, in the same way that Philip, I guess, is exploring for mobile, he's definitely adopting a similar production process as you like to watch being used in TV. Whereas I guess what Caroline's kind of angle is, it's got a lot to do with immediacy and that kind of authenticity of just being in the moment. Corinne has a comment. It is loving this. In 2 years of teaching university journalism, 10% of my students watch TV news. It's just not something that they do. Caroline's providing some side insights into how to approach that from a media point of view.
And Glenn, do you know what's funny is that, you know, my job is to look over the whole journalism industry and see what the trends are and see what's going on. And I don't enjoy watching television news because I am a millennial and I'm impatient and I want to know what's happening then and there. So I do think it's funny because obviously I appreciate when things are done, you know, beautifully. And I myself like lovely polished packages and things, you know, like Philip's team's doing. But a lot of news organisations don't have the ability to do that. And so if you're just starting out in Mojo, for example, and you want to try and engage more people, instead of, you know, trying to think we have to go right up there, you could start off with this raw content and still be connecting with audiences that you haven't been able to connect with already.
I think that's interesting because Philip had exactly the same line, Caroline. There's kind of, you know, you start with what you do at, and then, you know, he said to aspire, I guess, aspire to the sort of level of polished production, you know, in due course. And Corinne has jumped in there with the question, Caroline, what apps are you using? So just in case people aren't aware, if they visit the journalism.co.uk social media channels, they will see your good self doing lots of weekly updates, very, very polished, I might add, beautifully done so. So, you know, you too, for the right platform, I guess, will produce to a very high standard. So what apps do you use to produce those?
I'm a strong believer that you only need a few apps. Like, I know that there's 100 and, you know, loads of apps out there that people want to try. And a lot of people watching this live stream will probably have lots of apps on their phones where they think, oh, I could use this and this. This is the whole Mojo overwhelm that we spoke about at Mojo Fest last year. I really think that it's about having a few that you use all the time and know how to use them really well. So probably the same as what Philip said, Filmic Pro, always for filming, LumaFusion, Quick. I use Snapseed from Mojo Fest tours. I've been using that quite a lot. And, you know, it's just a case of getting to grips with those specifically. And I've also been trying to experiment with a few apps to make Instagram stories look a bit nicer, you know, the ones that you can put templates into them. But yeah, exactly. So it's just, I'd like to make templates on LumaFusion and then just keep going off that. And in the last few days, since I have a bigger screen, I've just new phone with a bigger screen, I've absolutely been loving making templates on LumaFusion, and I would strongly recommend anyone to just go away and get to grips with one app before they go nuts and get into Mojo overwhelm. It's easily done. We've all done it, but you'll never get a good workflow if you're going in and out of everything.
True enough. Yeah, choose the few you need and basically get to know them really, really well. That's great advice. Okay, so wrapping it up then, I think it's a case of it has to be one or the other. I get the strong sense that it's an idea of the audience is not the same across all platforms. Obviously, clearly television has a different audience to those on mobile particularly and on social media. But I really, really like this point that you made about the level of authenticity and access. I remember once actually in one of the other broadcasters that I briefly worked with for a while, someone once said to me, no one ever wants to see what happens behind the camera. It's always what happens in front of the camera. And I remember kind of thinking, that's the traditional TV thinking loud and clear right there, right?
Oh,
so,
yeah. I would argue sometimes it's more professional to show people what you're doing in the newsroom, show people how you're investigating a story, show people how you're setting up a shot and interviewing someone that can't show their face. You know, I think it's an amazing tool that we've got to use, this kind of behind the scenes access, and audiences absolutely love it, because just think you're getting a little insight into something that maybe your friends aren't seeing. And that's, you know, it seems so little and minor, but that is trust. You're building trust with your audience. You're building the relationship with them. So this kind of behind the scenes of how you get stories off the ground and how you investigate topics and things like that, I think that this kind of raw footage is useful for that. But I mean, I guess, as you say, there is space for both, especially say on Instagram, for example, you don't see much raw footage in the actual timeline. You just see it in the stories. So I think that obviously the level of professionalism in how pieces are actually cut together, people want to see beautiful pieces when they're actually looking down their timelines, but it depends on the context, your audience and the platform. So you've just got to make a decision with the resources that you have and what you're actually posting.
To be quite, so a conversation has come up quite a lot in the course over the last week in particular, is this idea of if you were to reinvent the newsroom, I think one person lying to me was just burn it down. I don't think it's made it, but it's like, as in, you know, the problem is, having come from traditional broadcast, the problem is that you're in a juggernaut, which is a very clearly defined road ahead of it, and has all these kind of preconceived ideas of the parameters under which they must operate. But if you're to just rethink news, and if you're to start from scratch, and if you're to use Mojo as the content creation platform, rather than having to be tied to high-end broadcast infrastructure, I think it might be a completely different user experience. I really like this thing that you're talking about in relation to this idea of building up trust and relationship with the audience. Is if the one thing that I see regularly in news is it's a pipeline and it's a one-way pipe. There's no return circuit. There's no real feedback opportunity. How many broadcasters, you know, turn off the comments on Facebook, for instance, because they trolled and they're afraid of getting trolled. So I think, yeah, it would be a really interesting thing to explore this idea of if you're to restart a newsroom from scratch and redefine it so that the relationship with the audience is actually at the center of the relationship rather than we will tell you what you need to know. What might that look like? Quite an interesting.
I think that when news organisations start, they probably will start it as Mojo based. I mean, why wouldn't they? I don't see any reason that they would spend all this extra cash. Why don't you actually go out there and experiment? You know. But you know, if you look at
examples, but anyway.
But you see, for example, there's a news organisation called Efecto Cocuy, and they're based in Venezuela. And I've interviewed them a few times, and they told me that they use Mojo specifically because their government is spreading disinformation about the news organisation, and they want to prove to their audience that what they're reporting is what's happening on the ground. So sometimes they have to go live and they have to show this kind of raw footage that's not edited because they want to prove to their audiences, you know, you can trust us. We're a reliable information source. So, you know, I guess it does depend on your situation 100%, but it's down to your own preferences. But it's definitely worth experimenting with and not poo-pooing anything that's not been seen as traditionally professional. You know, we're going into 2019 now. Hashtags, GIFs, stickers, emojis. It's a new form of communication, and you know, this is our business. We're there to communicate with the audience, so it's a new language and we've just got to learn it, but we will.
That's another fantastic quote. I have two great quotes from each interview. That's fantastic. Listen, I have to throw in some questions in here. So Ritika has come back with this question: how should we cover or interview sensitive cases on mobile? Let's park that for a second. We could talk about Yusuf's strategy and then the traditional strategy, which would be an interesting case study. Hossam has thrown in, could 360 video be a transparent way of filming? I'd like to dip into that one. And then Lynn has said, can you please repeat what the name of the news organization in Venezuela is called?
Yeah, Efecto Cucuyu.
Yeah, I think might need to type that into the comments. Just I don't know.
I'll type it in. Yeah.
And so let's dive into the sensitive cases. Is very specific, but let's address it anyway. So interviewing sensitive cases on mobile. Go.
Well, obviously we have to talk about Yusuf's face filter case. When Yusuf Omar was working for the Hindustan Times, based in South Africa, in Delhi, he went out and he basically interviewed victims of sexual assault, and he made them talk into the camera, but he put a face filter on, which you'll see on Snapchat. A lot of them got to pick whichever filter they wanted, and it was of, say, a dragon, and the dragon's face went over them. So a lot of audiences might think, oh, well, that's a bit unprofessional, like you're using a face filter of a dragon. But in actual fact, these women got to tell their stories to camera in their own voices, and their identity was hidden. Traditionally we might darken the face so you can't see it, or film an interview from behind so you're just seeing the back of their head. There's no reason that those techniques can't be brought into mobile journalism, because effectively you're just shooting on a different device. So you can definitely be using that at the same time. But we've seen, a lot of the tools and things that you can use in story formats, such as in Snapchat and Instagram, you can actually use emojis or cover over people's faces, or that you can be really, really creative with it. And it's not to say that you are making you're not making a serious situation lighthearted at all. You can do things in a really tasteful way. But I just think maybe use traditional forms of interviewing sensitive subjects and just transfer that into more of a social media platform style.
Yeah, okay, great answer. Hossam's one on 360, being more transparent. Thoughts?
Well, yeah, of course, you're seeing everywhere around you. Of course, I guess more audiences have to get to grips with how to kind of consume 360 content, what it's about. More journalists have to learn how to shoot in 360, the kind of rules of shooting in 360, how close you can be to the camera, how to do it. But I guess when it becomes a bit more accessible, cameras get better, I do think a lot more news organisations will be getting involved with it, and virtual reality and more exciting technology like that.
Yeah, my own take on it, for the record, would have been interested in 360 since it moved from non-mainstream into mainstream. And same thing, I would 100% agree with you. I think it's down to actually the missing part in the whole equation is the consumer experience. I think that the production process has become so simple now. Like, if you look at Insta360 devices, which are just a couple €100 versus the 4,000 or 5,000 euros you would have needed just 4 years ago, it's very, very simple. You can get amazing results. But the key thing being is, how can the audience experience it most effectively? Clearly, the mobile phone is the best way to experience it, ideally in a visor, but no one has really come up with anything that does that really well and is, very transportable yet, hopefully in time. But yeah, I think 360 could be very interesting. There's a huge debate about it and whether 360 or 180 is better, but blah, blah, blah. But anyway, that might be for another day, Hossam. We won't park that one for a deep dive. As one final question we'll get to, we're almost on the clock. Simone asked, about immediacy? What is your experience with live streaming? Well, that's a really interesting one. A tuppence worth from this, which is back in 2015 at the first MOJO Con event. We had a speaker called Shadi Rahimi, who's from AJ Plus in the US. And her line, I still remember quite vividly, is when they were covering the riots in Charlottesville, I think it was, they live streamed everything, and it was under exactly the same lines what Caroline's just said. It was very much to do with that idea of the authenticity. It was raw, it was immediate. People could see everything that was going on and make up their own mind on what was going on. But also, which I think is interesting, and this is a throw to journalism.co.uk, at a previous News Rewired event, it could be now 2 years ago, I think, I saw Tim Poole that you had as a speaker. And Tim Poole, who is also synonymous with mobile journalism, he effectively made his name by turning up with his phone and live streaming for hours at the Occupy protests in the US. I'm pretty sure that was his first big flurry into Mojo. So, yeah, it definitely is a way of giving that level of authenticity, but I'm not too sure that people have really perfected the art of live streaming from mobile yet. But that's just my tuppence.
No.
Caroline?
Well, there's a lot of ethics behind live streaming, which I feel, because live streaming is so easy to do now, there needs to be more training in the ethics behind live streaming, when you should and shouldn't go live. And of course, like, we've covered this topic quite a few times on journalism.co.uk, and we've covered reporters that have done it so tactfully. You know, Richard Goodyear from ARD in Germany, he covered 2 terrorist attacks, one in Munich, one in Nice, with his mobile phone, beating all the major camera crews. He went live to 80 camera crews around the world, you know, with his mobile phone, beating people that had technical problems. They couldn't get there for transport issues. And he specifically told me, Glenn, that the best footage that he didn't stream that night was what he didn't stream. The best footage he took was what he didn't stream, because he didn't know what was going to happen next. And so, you know, breaking news scenario where you think, oh, I'm going to take some raw footage because this is great, this is immediate, we need to bring our audiences into it now. Nah, not necessarily, because you don't know what's about to happen next. So that was a really interesting case for me to hear about how he handled it. And what he actually did was he took footage and he sent it back to his newsroom for them to then decide what was going to be put out. But, you know, he could have so easily live streamed a lorry coming down a road, you know, but he didn't want to. And I think that it's important for journalists to make those editorial decisions, especially when they're going to think about going into live streaming. What do you do? And also the question is, aside from, I guess, the ethics, is about the quality. Do you need to live stream something? It's the same with 360 VR. Do you need to do it? Because if it could be better pre-recorded, I would say do that, because you don't want to lose quality and make errors if you're going to be live streaming something that doesn't necessarily warrant Q&As or isn't exactly timely. So I just think that there needs to be a little bit more thought about it in newsrooms before reporters just go and hit the big red button. But the cases that we've seen so far, I think it's commendable how reporters actually do stop and think and, you know, what's in front of them. I guess that's the reason, you know, they're storytellers, and that's the difference between somebody in the street doing it and a storyteller. Yeah.
So again, just as a reference for this one, Simone, if you look up one of my fellow trainers on the Thomson platform, Sue Llewellyn, who has journalism.co.uk from about, I think, 2 years ago, about her acronym, which was SPECTRE, which was all to do with this, the risks associated with live streaming from a professional journalist's point of view. It's a document as well worth searching for, or actually maybe Hossam or Sarah, if they're online, could maybe post it into the chat line up here as well. Okay, it's just after 2 o'clock, so, you know, I think it's been a very, very valuable and engaging discussion. Caroline, thank you so much for your insights. I feel so old. I feel so you know, I really feel I should break out the Zimmer frame now because I'm so out of touch. But anyway, lots of food for thought, and I really, really appreciate your insights. Thanks a million.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any final words?
Go out there, experiment, and then email me so I can interview you about it.
Good tip, like that. Okay, listen, thanks a million again. We'll wrap up. I'll let you go, Caroline. Thanks a million for everything. All right.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Bye. Okay, so we'll wrap it up. We're just over the hour. This is number 2 in a series of chats that basically take place on a monthly basis here on Crowdcast on Facebook and YouTube. It's all part of the journalism.co. Sorry, I was going to plug journalism.co.uk. The Journalism Now platform, which is part of an e-learning initiative from Thomson Foundation. So I'm sure Hossam, who basically is the Director of Operations, and I've forgotten his new title, but Innovation is in there somewhere as well, will give a quick plug to the course. Some of the courses cover some of the topics that we're discussing here. Mobile journalism is one of my courses, but we have 360 content, we have social media, and lots of others. So if you haven't already perhaps visited the platform, have a quick look. In other news, just to let you know, if mobile journalism is an area that is of interest, just to let you know that as of today, I have released tickets basically for the annual Mobile Journalism Conference in Ireland called MOJO Fest. It will take place from the 6th to the 8th of June in Galway, Ireland. There are limited early bird tickets left, down to just 10 left now. So you can get a discount on that. But if you're interested in joining some of the speakers that you've just heard from, hopefully, and perhaps another 48 or 50 more, we'd love to see you in Galway in June. So that's it for this month's chat. I'm not entirely sure if we're going to have one immediately just before Christmas. I'll have a chat with Hossam this evening, and if so, we'll be pushing that out over the network over the next few days to let you know. Remember, the conversation doesn't end when this video call ends, because these are available to watch back on the platforms. And equally, if you're interested in picking up any of the stuff that you've heard as discussion topics with any of the speakers, their social media accounts, we'll post them here as well. So Caroline is at Caroline Scott and Philip is at Philip Bromwell, both very, very active on Twitter and other platforms as well, of course. And I'm at Glen B. Mulcahy. So I hope you enjoyed the chat, and I hope to see all of you on the next one. Bye for now.